Freud and Rank had a different relationship than Freud and Jung. So Jung was already, in some ways, superior to Freud professionally, and Rank was just a kid.
Mm.
He hadn't finished high school.
Was it like father-son, would you say?
Exactly. Yeah. So Freud was so taken by this brilliant young man who's self-taught, autodidact, that he pretty much invited him into his home. Otto Rank was the number two person in the hierarchy of psychoanalysis for many, many years. Jung was the successor. Jung broke. Therefore, Freud had to find another successor, and he made it Otto Rank. And so Rank was extremely powerful by 1924. I studied the intellectual history of psychology and psychoanalysis. I'm interested in the development of ideas, and how they form, who carries them, whether or not they're accepted, and why or why not.
Yeah.
And I'm just stimulated by the human mind. And here were people who were asking very important questions about consciousness, unconsciousness, about motivation, about sex, about human relationships, creativity.
Hello, everyone. Today I am with Robert Kramer PhD. So welcome, Robert.
Thank you so much for inviting me, John. It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Robert, I've been very much enjoying reading your book on Otto Rank and the creation of modern psychotherapy. And that's it. That's the one.
I just happened to have one copy here, and I thought I would show Otto Rank standing right behind the professor, his left arm casually draped over the throne-like chair of the professor. That's how relaxed he was in the presence of the master.
Well, that is. I'm going to ask you a question in a second, Robert, but that's interesting in itself, because I think one thing that Carl Jung and Otto Rank have in common is that they both were in the inner sanctum, if you want to put it that way, with Freud, the inner cabal, but they both developed their own ideas. And I've always had, I'm speaking as a lay observer here, I always think about Freud. It was his way or the highway. And these two bright people came up with very much with their own, who had their own genius, Otto Rank and Jung probably, and Freud was not that impressed by it, was he?
Well, he's a very complicated man, Sigmund Freud. So he enlisted Carl Jung into the inner circle because Jung offered something that Freud did not have, which was respectability as a psychiatrist. Freud was not a psychiatrist, and he was attacked furiously by people in that field. And so he wanted to bring Jung in to be his guardian against those attacks. Rank was different. Rank was not an MD. Freud was an MD, but he studied neurology. Rank was a PhD in humanities, in German literature. And so the relationship between Freud and Jung was different than it was between Freud and Rank. So Freud wanted Jung to be his crown prince. He anointed him as a successor, and Jung said, I have my own ideas, professor, and I'd be happy to participate in this movement, but you need to know I'm my own man. And Freud was not willing to accept that. And so he left. So Jung and Freud broke. I guess they knew each other from probably 1907 to 1913. I think that was the date, the big date of the break, 6, 7 years. Rank stayed much longer. So Rank came to Freud at the tender age of 21.
Wow.
Without having finished high school, much less gotten a PhD.
It's kind of a prodigy. Is he Rank a prodigy at that age?
Rank was a incredibly brilliant thinker and reader. So he was well known in the circle as having read everything, and people would be amazed at the kinds of references that he included in his voluminous writings. But Freud and Rank had a different relationship than Freud and Jung. So Jung was already, in some ways, superior to Freud professionally, and Rank was just a kid. He hadn't finished high school.
Was it like father-son, would you say?
Exactly. Yeah. So Freud was so taken by this brilliant young man who's self-taught, autodidact, that he pretty much invited him into his home and to dinner, to meet the family, Martha and his sons and his daughters and all the others. And so Rank knew everybody in Freud's family personally because he would go to his house at least once a week for dinner before meetings of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Society. And Freud was so impressed by this young man that he decided to fund his education. So not only did he send him, he had to go to a high school, it was a gymnasium, at the age of 21. That's pretty quite a feat in itself. But then Freud said, you have to go get a PhD because I want you to be at my side and I need your intellect and your credentials have to be in order. So he paid for his way to the University of Vienna. So Freud invested not only his emotions in Rank, but his finances.
His bucks.
And he also made Rank the first paid member of the psychoanalytic movement, which is quite startling. I mean, so Freud was making a living as a therapist, but nobody else was being paid for this. And so he said, I want you to be my right-hand man. And I will bring you in, and I will tell you all the secrets that I don't tell all the others. Freud did not have a very high opinion of the Viennese followers that he accumulated. He really made fun of them. They were had no intellect to speak of, and they were. He just had contempt for them, actually, except for what he called little Rank. Little Rank is what he would call it.
Yeah, well, I've got two questions for you, Robert. So you choose which one you want to answer first. Is one is where did Rank start to come up with his own ideas and genius, and where did the parting start to take place? But I also want to ask, maybe even before that, is how did you get onto Otto Rank? What was it that? How did you get interested in this whole thing?
Well, I've asked myself that same question. I can't come up with a particular date, time, month, year, but I do know that I was quite impressed by a book I read in 1975 called The Denial of Death, which is by the cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker.
Okay.
This book won the Pulitzer Prize in America. That's one of the highest literary prizes awarded by Columbia University. And Becker writes just exuberantly about the brilliance of Rank and how Rank had been forgotten and condemned and excommunicated and buried by the psychoanalyst. And yet, when Becker came across his books, he was just flattened. You read Denial of Death, and you'll see every chapter has got something about Rankian in it. And so after reading Becker, being very moved by his book, I said, well, what made Ernest Becker so fascinated by Otto Rank? I had heard the name, but knew virtually nothing. So I said, okay, let me start to read and explore. And I got very, very interested because I became convinced that Ernest Becker was not exaggerating. So there's a quote I included. In fact, I have a picture of Becker in my book. I don't know if you can see it. That's Ernest Becker.
It was a very, well, it's sort of a groundbreaking. Well, that book was influential for many people, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was huge. It's considered one of the great works of synthesis. What can I say? Intellectual firepower of the second half of the 20th century. I mean, so Becker himself died young at 49,
right.
Before he learned of the award of the Pulitzer Prize. The book had been published. He had cancer, and he died at 49. You know, it's startling. And so because his books so influenced me, and Becker himself has been now the subject of movies. So I mentioned in my book that there was 3 or 4 movies. I can't remember now. I think it's 4 that have been made about Becker. Not wrong. Rank doesn't get any movies made, but Becker has his work is lasting. His work has made a huge mark in cultural anthropology, behavioral sciences, and social psychology in particular, with the incredible work of academics all over the world studying terror management theory, a new field of experimental social psychology that takes the ideas in Becker's book, all of which are based on Rank's ideas, and does experiments on them. I mean, this is quite astonishing. There have been over 1,500 such experiments testing Becker's hypotheses in the denial of death, how important death is, and why we build cultural defenses against it, and how this can lead to evil and destructiveness and war and genocide even. So Becker's ideas are very powerful, and they're being tested in dozens of countries around the world. So it's cross-cultural. This is just highly unusual for any writer to have this kind of attention paid to his ideas. So I claim in my book that Otto Rank's ideas, I think I say something to the effect that I argue, this is in the inside cover of my book. I argue that if the 20th century was the century of Freud, the 21st is shaping up to be that of Rank. I didn't mention Jung here because I do think Rank's future is much more promising than Jung's. There's a variety of reasons for that. But anyway, and then the next sentence is, no other psychoanalyst theories have ever been tested with as much empirical rigor and across so many different cultures as those of Rank. This is startling. A man who had been forgotten, who'd been called psychotic by the Freudians for leaving Freud. You have to be psychotic. They also called Jung similar nasty names, but I have to make a point that many people don't realize. When Ernest Jones wrote his 3-volume biography of Freud in the late 50s, he accused Rank of becoming psychotic. And he never said, he himself, Jung, although some of the Freudians did, he never accused Jung of being psychotic. And the reason is political. Jung was living at the time that Jones was writing his biographies, which Jung died in 1961. So so Jones's books came out in 57, 59, and I think 60. It's 3 volumes, very influential. So Jung gets criticized, but
not to the same degree as Rank.
Rank, why?
What I'm getting from you, and maybe you can tell me if I'm correct or not, is that Rank was maybe forgotten there for a while. His genius was perhaps forgotten, but then it's re-emerged in a big way. But there was a time when he was so kind of, what's the word, excommunicated by the Freudians that...
Well, the Freudians ignored him. The Freudians practiced what in German is called Totgeschweigen, which means death by silence. In other words, if they weren't calling him psychotic or mentally ill, they simply weren't referring to him at all. And yet, Otto Rank was the number 2 person in the hierarchy of psychoanalysis for many, many years. Jung was the successor. Jung broke. Therefore, Freud had to find another successor, and he made it Otto Rank. And so Rank was extremely powerful by 1924. And he made a lot of enemies in the inner circle, particularly Jones, who hated him.
Yeah.
Because Rank was much closer to Freud personally. Of course, Rank was living in Vienna, and he saw...
There would have been a lot of envy.
Very destructive, very, very bitter and envious. And so, Rank almost succeeded in having Jones removed from the secret committee because they had so much tension.
Yeah.
And Rank at one point lost it and said, we have to just tell him goodbye. And there were many reasons for this. I talk about some of them in the book, but that's not the highlight of the book. It's not politics. It's about...
No. And I, just to let you know where I'm coming from is that there's room for more than one genius in my book, and it's the coat of many colors, and it's kind of like I like Carl Jung over there, but then those people that have made a huge influence, like Rank, and it seems to me that there's room for all of them, to add their particular genius towards things. But can I just ask you a very quick question? Were you actually a psychologist, Robert, or you're a scholar of modern psychotherapy?
I studied the intellectual history of psychology and psychoanalysis. I'm interested in the development of ideas, and how they form, who carries them, whether or not they're accepted, and why or why not.
Yeah,
and I'm just stimulated by the human mind. And here were people who were asking very important questions about consciousness, unconsciousness, about motivation, about sex, about human relationships, creativity. And so these are all human subjects. So anybody could be and should be interested in these, whether you're a psychologist or not.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, can we get on then? Where did Rank start to diverge from Freud? Just to, where was his theory coming in, really? Or building or growing?
Well, I asked that question a lot.
Yeah.
Because I've studied Rank's writings from his early days up to long after he broke with Freud. Now, I studied Freud's writings, and I'm trying to figure out what really happened. And I make some stabs at that in the book. So I have 2 chapters about this subject. It's extremely, I would say, I couldn't summarize it in a short interview with you. I would like to invite those of your readers or listeners watchers who might be interested in this, just get a copy of the book and take a look at 3 chapters. One is called David and Goliath. The second one is called The Will of the Father. And the third one is called The Will of the Mother. Now, the chapter on David and Goliath deals with a single dream that Freud had after surgery for his cancer. So Freud was diagnosed with cancer in 1923 after having smoked at least 30 cigars a day for decades. It created cancer of the jaw and the upper palate. And it was a very serious event. And Freud, the people who knew Freud, who were in the circle, who were in the Freud family, and who was intimate with Freud, like Rank, who was then the number 2 person in the movement, understood that this was life and death for Freud, and that he could die, and that Otto Rank would be the successor to Freud. He had been actually designated my heir. He actually wrote a letter. I guess it was not a letter, but he told all the inner circle that Rank is the youngest, he's the smartest, he published more books than all of you combined, which he did. He was a prolific writer. It's unbelievable. And I trust him completely, and therefore he's my successor. But at the time he had the surgery, Rank visited him in the hospital room in Vienna. And Freud shared a dream that he had. And the dream, which is very complex, I'm not going to go into the details, was basically Freud concluded that you are the David who has come to kill the Goliath. Why? Because Otto Rank, at the same month that Freud was diagnosed with cancer, April 1923, had finished a new book, his latest, called The Trauma of Birth. It actually was completed the same month in which Freud's diagnosis.
Very synchronistic, if you want to put it that way. The timing was incredible.
They understood something was going on here. And the dream, which Freud shared with Rank, because Freud often shared his dreams with Rank and was amused and delighted when Rank would give interpretations of them. Unlike with Jung, you remember when he was on the boat with Jung going to the U.S.
Going to America.
Jung asked him, the U.S., yeah. Jung said, well, would you share some of your dreams? He says, Freud says, no, I cannot. I will lose my authority. Whoa, Jung immediately realized, as he said it in his memoirs, that was it. I'm not going to trust him.
That was the seed of, that was the end, basically.
That was the end. Yeah. That was the end. And it went downhill. Next 4 years were not great. But Freud shared his dreams with Rank. That's how close they were. And Rank made an interpretation, which I write up in the chapter called David and Goliath. I can't summarize it in a few minutes or even in an hour because it's really thick with meaning, And Freud is drawing the conclusion that Otto Rank's book is intended to kill him. Now, what's in the book? The book itself is extremely complicated, and people who try to read it today cannot make sense of it. You have to be immersed in the culture and the vocabulary and the teachings of Freud to understand why this book was so dangerous to Freud. It was like kryptonite was to Superman. To Superman, you remember the comics? I used to read these comics. So when it showed kryptonite to Superman, that means he'd lose all this.
But,
his strength.
Robert,
So,
tell me if I'm wrong. And again, this is a lay observation, right? So, you've got to be careful of lay observations. But having read your book, what I was really getting, and I've really enjoyed it. It's so beautifully written the way, and the way you have scholarship, and it's interesting, and it's a beautiful book. But I see Freud as championing the masculine in many senses. There's something patriarchal about Freud, and just in the way he doesn't tolerate anyone having different ideas. It's old school patriarchal in one sense. And Otto Rank has brought, later on in your book, when you see the, psychology of relationship, or, and Otto Rank brought in the feminine side.
absolutely, yeah.
And so you've got this battle between, it's like the great mother and the great father having a kind of a stoush.
Yeah. So Jung touched on these themes, but he didn't do it as deeply and as dangerously as Rank did. Freud was really threatened by Rank's book because it undermined his status as the premier cartographer of the human psyche. So that's what Freud was about. He wanted immortality. He wanted to be a scientific great. And he compared himself to Copernicus, to Galileo, to Darwin. That was going to be his legacy. And here's young Rank, his number two guy, taking a different road, not rejecting Freud's emphasis on the role of fathers, but simply, this is so striking, simply giving room for women to play a significant role in the child's life and development. And that means societal life. That's all. Well, there's more to the book because I'm vastly oversimplifying it.
Yeah.
But so Jung touched on it, and Freud was immediately a suspect and basically said, okay, go your own way. I don't care. You're not going to be one of us. So adios, amigo. But with Rank, Freud is now dying. And Rank has published a book which is deeper, in a much deeper sense than Jung ever did, threatened everything that Freud had built up to that time. And that's why it was a life and death struggle between the two. For the next 2 years, they met countless times to talk about their differences. So the differences are summarized in the next two chapters that I just hinted at, called The Will of the Father and The Will of the Mother. For Freud, only the will of the father played a role in the infant psyche. This is shocking today, which is an absurd idea.
Yeah.
But Freud made the powerful father the center of the infant psyche and the development of the superego, which is the source of all morality, ethics, civilization, culture, and religion. That's how important.
And the myth of Oedipus, wasn't it? It was the Oedipal myth.
Yeah, but don't be distracted by the story of the myth. People tend to get lost into that. There's a bit of sleight of hand taking place there. What I mean is that what the Freud was saying, which is why he was so opposed to Jung and to Rank, Freud is saying that only the father's role is important in infants' development. So there's a lot of other stuff in the Oedipus myth, but at this point, go right directly
to that,
to the core of the dispute.
Yeah.
And the will of the father explains why Freud had made that the center of his psychology, and the will of the mother explains why Rank made that the center. So I won't go into the details, but the readers will find a very good, short, the best I could make, summary of what happened between the two men, Sigmund Freud and Otto Rank. After Freud develops cancer and then accuses his number two guy of wanting to kill him. Now, it was actually the other way around. This really shocked me. This is the first time I've written this. I've written other things about Rank. I discovered that Freud's public response to Rank came in a book published in 1926 called Inhibitions, Symptoms, and Anxiety. And this is an attack on Otto Rank, a really harsh attack. Yeah. Freud had not made any public criticism of Rank before 1926. So they're fighting from 1924 to 1926, 2 years, intense struggle in behind closed doors. Except for the inner circle, no one knew that this was taking place.
It's like it's like a father who invites his son into the business and thinks the son is going to, do it all his way. And then the son gets his own ideas, and that's very challenging to the father, who tries to then just kind of disown him or something.
Well, it's more than disown. So this is really, the stakes are high, John. This is life and death. It's not just a struggle over who will inherit, the family business, which happens on a daily basis in every corporations and small businesses, medium-sized businesses. That happens a lot. It's well known. This is David and Goliath. This is life and death. This is one of us will live and the other will die. And Freud wrote a letter to his very close friend, Sándor Ferenczi, the Hungarian, who had been Rank's best friend for 4 years and had collaborated with him on the new ideas, which Ferenczi completely supported, 100%. He said, this is great. This book is going to transform the whole theory and therapy of psychoanalysis. We're going to be more relational. We're going to talk about our we're going to have an authentic relationship in the therapeutic encounter. This is not something Freud was very high on. So Ferenczi and Rank were together. Freud writes a letter to Ferenczi, then Rank's best friend, saying, I am going to assassinate Rank. That's the actual words that he used. Assassination. Now imagine getting a letter from Freud saying that he's going to assassinate your best friend. What does he mean? He's not going to shoot him. He says in the same letter, I've decided to write a new manuscript. I'm working on it now, which will be my critique of Rank. But he used the word assassination in the letter. And so Ferenczi immediately abandons his best friend, who had been his closest friend for 4 years. They collaborated intensively. They went to each other's houses. The wives knew each other. They were very, very intimate. And Ferenczi says, I have to leave because you can't get in between Freud and Rank when Freud is taking out the sword. And the blow came in 1926 when Freud decides to publish this book. Now there's a lot of smoke in this book. So you go through the book and you say, well, what is he saying? It's confusing. Freud is not really as focused in this book as he is in most of his other writings. It's a jagged book. It's raggedy. It's not written well. So Freud was a master at writing. This is one of his worst books. It just zigzags up and down, left and right. You can't even understand. He repeats himself. He repeats himself 3 times. Why is he repeat? You know that Freud is really disturbed when he's writing this book. Of course, he's suffering from cancer. Let's put that aside.
He's dying,
but he's also taking on his number 2 guy. He's trying to live, and he doesn't tell Rank about the book. So this is really big. It doesn't seem like a big deal. But Otto Rank in 1926, from 1919 to 1926, 7 years, he was the managing director of Freud's publishing house, his private publishing house where Freud published all his books, because he didn't trust the Viennese publishers. They were screwing up his books. They left typos in. He said, I got to get this straight. Let's give it to my man, Otto, and he'll handle it because his guy is just worked like the devil.
But he didn't tell him about this book.
Didn't tell him. Somehow he gave it to the printer, because of course he could do that. And Freud assassinates Rank in a book that he doesn't let Rank read first. Because if he had, as Rank had read all his prior books, he edited them. I went to Freud's papers at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. You get manuscripts are there, his handwritten manuscripts. You can see Otto Rank's handwriting on the manuscripts when he's making little editorial remarks. Professor, do we want to keep this reference in? It contradicts this stuff. Rank is editing Freud. Rank is directing the Freud's publishing house. Rank approves every book by Freud, and he doesn't see this, and then he gets assassinated because this book is going out to the world.
That's a big deal. That's a very big deal.
Not any more complaints in the inner circle among letters, private letters they exchanged, which they did, dozens of letters. But that's in the inner circle of 6, 7 people.
So
this is everybody.
How old was Rank at this stage? And I think I read in your book that, he didn't talk a lot about, when there was the separation, after the separation, he didn't always talk a lot about it, did
he? Rank was very discreet. At the time of the separation in 1926, Rank was 42. So he was born in 1884. Freud was 28 years older than him. So in 1926, just do the numbers, and Freud is over 70. He's 70, over 70. So So that was the end. Fascinatingly, people haven't picked this up. It's been known by some, Rank's biographer, my close friend, E. James Lieberman, with whom I collaborated about 14 years ago. We published the letters between Freud and Rank. For the first time, they came out in 2012. So Jim knows about this. Others, it's not widely known. Rank went to Freud personally to confront him face to face about this attack. He had embarrassed Rank. He had shamed Rank. He had attacked Rank, and he had not allowed Rank to respond. He put out a book, and everybody was going to read it, and they were going to, Rank's star was going to fall. There was clearly Freud's declaration that Otto Rank is no longer my number 2 guy. He's out.
It was an
assassination. It was devastating.
An assassination, as you said. But I mean, how did he? I'm a bit loose on the details, but it wasn't that long before he found his way to the US, Rank, was it? Or, maybe that was a contributing factor, was it?
So Rank he went for the first time to the US in 1924. He gave lectures on the trauma of birth and other ideas, which I collected in a book I published in 1996. It's called A Psychology of Difference, the American Lectures of Otto Rank. So the 1924 lectures are in there, and other later lectures he gave in America are there as well. So he started going in 1924, and he later moved to America permanently in 1935. But in the years between 24 and 35, he would go periodically to America to give lectures, and he became a professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work, where he was extremely influential in in changing the character of American social work, which had been Freudian dominated, into what's now called relationship-based social work, or strengths-based social work. So along with two of his colleagues who invited him, Jesse Taft and Virginia Robinson, Otto Rank was one of the principal intellectual foundations for American social work, which later influenced the world. So Rank's influence is very strong in social work.
Yeah, and I was interested to read in your book, Robert, that with Freud, the emphasis was very much on the doctor, wasn't it? Like even in the sense of sometimes as the patient laid there and they didn't even look at each other, you know, the analyst, but and then the doctor was meant to give insights and interpretations or whatever, whereas Rank was doing something which then influenced a lot of other people very much, but it was relationship oriented. So it was connection or client focused, as they started to call it. So what's it all about?
So Freudian psychoanalysis, and even today, it's practiced by some analysts, most of whom have abandoned this Freudian approach, did not allow for a relationship to take place between the patient and the analyst. The analyst was not allowed to show any emotion, was not allowed even to have any feelings. They had to be uprooted through their own training analysis. And they were just an objective observer of the patient. And the patient could have any emotions they wanted, but the analyst was cool, was a scientist. So Freud had made clear that this was a model of research into the unconscious. He was doing research. He was a scientist, and you're forbidden to have any relationship with the object of research. You have to keep your distance.
No laughing around about the football results or anything like that in those therapy sessions.
No. So that's the classical Freudian model, which today, by some New York analysts, is still practiced, although the vast majority have abandoned that. They actually discovered that it was harmful, destructive. The patients felt abused and hurt, that their feelings weren't listened to. That's what they would complain about. You can sit there behind me smoking your cigar, giving your interpretations, but you don't care a damn thing about me.
It's and so the analyst, expert and patient who is low value in a sense, isn't it?
That's right. And Freud had, this is something that's not known. Freud had contempt for patients. In the inner circle, he would call them names, like, this is shocking today, but he would call them Negroes. He called them trash. I'm not kidding. This is words from letters that he wrote to the inner circle. He called them pests. He said, they're not worth anything. We only do psychoanalysis, he told Ferenczi and Rank and others in the inner circle, to make an income and for our scientific purposes to do research.
It reminds me a bit of Darwin. You know, I mean, obviously it's a different field that Darwin was in, but the level of kind of detachment is very strong.
Well, it's the 19th century model, positivist model, and Freud adopted it and excused the failures he had in therapy. By the way, he was a terrible therapist. It's now known, as more research is done, by looking at his actual patients, Freud's patients, that he was absolutely, not only was he a bad therapist, often he was harmful. I mean, he hurt, he was destructive. This is really shocking to people. And many psychoanalysts don't want to talk about this because
Yeah.
it embarrasses them, and they don't really have a good answer for why he did that. And therefore they just want to put it under the rug. But the evidence is indisputable.
So what was Rank saying apart from building a relationship? What was he doing? What was he bringing to Pennsylvania?
He was bringing the creative will, an idea that really didn't exist and still doesn't exist in modern psychotherapy. I'm looking and looking, and I'm reading everything I can. I just don't see it. He was bringing, maybe Jung. You could tell me more about
Well,
Jung.
you know, I want to. I mean, I'm not interested in having a little competition here at all. But people have their loyalties or whatever. But I think in Jung and James Hillman, when I think there's a great similarity between what Rank calls the creative will and what Jung is calling the creative instinct. He says apart from the sex instinct and the survival instinct, you need the creative instinct. But then they're tapping into also the myth of Eros, the mysterious force of a creative Eros. And I actually see, obviously, I'm not into the detail of this stuff as much as what you're going to be, but I see a similarity on this emphasis on creation and the creative process in Rank and Jung. I think they're very similar that way, with many other differences, I bet.
Yeah. I'm happy to learn more about Jung's ideas and Hillman's ideas. I've read Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and I read Hillman's We've had 100 years of psychotherapy and nobody's gotten better. So that's a great book.
Yeah.
Was that Hillman who wrote that? I think it was.
Yeah, he wrote that one.
It's a
But
fine book.
he's written a lot about creativity, and he links it to Eros. But I think this emphasis, like, Jung said, a lot of his patients just, they didn't actually have a neurosis. They just needed assistance in fulfilling their creative potentials. Yeah. And when I read what you've written about Rank, I see he's saying something very similar in the creative will.
I think so. There's probably a lot of overlap. I've checked the references to Jung and Rank's writings, and he always shows respect for Jung. Unlike Freud, who was, took the axe to Jung in a variety of his essays, Rank doesn't do that. And so it's pretty clear that he read Jung. He had his own, Rank had his own path to go, but he was respectful. So there could be a lot of resonance between the two. There's no indication that they ever shared any correspondence. I've never found any. And when Ira Progoff was asked in an interview, Ira Progoff, the author of a very fine book on the three great pioneers, Freud, Adler, Jung, and Rank, was asked about his conversations with Jung and Rank, and he said, Progoff said, I asked Jung, he interviewed Jung apparently, about Rank, but Jung declined to answer. He says, I don't know what that means. So basically, there's nothing really that's said from one about the other.
But the art, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but art and artists, they both wrote extensively. Like, I think Jung called it the spirit in modern art and literature and poetry or whatever, but it's kind of like they both wrote extensively about the artist and art and the creative principles. So it seems like a strong force in them or something.
There must be resonance. They did read each other's work. So Jung read Rank early on when Rank published his Myth of the Birth of the Hero, which was published in 1909.
Right.
And it's very clear that Jung read it, because Rank says he read it. So there is a little remark by Rank about that. And as I say, Rank read Jung. So they read each other. Maybe they were so resonant with each other, they didn't feel a need to get into arguments of any kind. It's conceivable. It's conceivable that that happened. I don't know.
But when you were talking earlier about his prenatal theory, I mean, that wasn't common. Meaning, that was very much Rank's on his own, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's Rank on his own. So the trauma of birth idea is a very powerful idea. I have to say, I've read that book, came out in 1924. I've read it 10 times.
Yeah.
I had to read it that many times to try to think, can I really understand this book? It is excruciatingly complicated. And I distilled it in my book. Anybody who reads my book will think, boy, Otto Rank is such a clear writer. Look at this. He's so obvious. Yeah. Everything makes sense.
Not the case.
I spent 25 years trying to make sense of Rank's labyrinthine mind. He once told Jesse Taft, I crave simplicity. The other, complexity, I already have. He knew that he couldn't really get it down. So Freud was a master writer. Freud won the Goethe Prize for literature. Jung in general is a clear writer. There are parts of his work that are foggy to me. But Rank is virtually unreadable. So anybody who is interested in the slightest, I highly recommend.
I mean, that's what you're doing. It's beautiful how you've got the kind of thread through, and the depth and the simplicity at the same time. But I was also interested to know, like Anais Nin was very much a fan of. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and tell us about some of the people, because he had therapy, he had clients and patients too, didn't he? And
yes, of course. So Rank was known. So he moved to Paris after he broke with Freud to become the therapist for blocked artists. That's really what he specialized in. People who were musicians or painters, sculptors, writers, philosophers, even scientists who were blocked in their creative energy. They somehow knew that Rank, who had published a book in 1932, very famous book, Art and Artist, was the man to go to. So Anais Nin had been blocked in writing her fiction. She was a prolific diarist, thousands and thousands of pages, and she couldn't finish her novels. And so she made an appointment to see the world famous Otto Rank in Paris in 1933, I think it was. And then she told the story of what happened in volume 2 of her diaries, published in 1966 or 67.
Right.
150 pages about her therapy with Otto Rank. And she could not stop talking, and even the rest of her life.
She was a big fan of Otto Rank, wasn't she?
About how he released the creative life force in her so that she no longer had to put all her energy into her diaries, but she can write fiction, short stories, which she wanted to do.
So what if you, as a person that's really explored the genius of Otto Rank, what was that all about? And I just want to add in one other thing before you answer that. Lebenangst. The fear of life. I like this about, so it's not only the fear of death, but the fear of life, and the unlived life. I'm thinking he had a bit of a key into that kind of energy.
Yeah, that's a very, very profound idea that Irwin Yalom, the great existential psychotherapist, could not stop talking about in his books. Even in recent books, he's writing about Otto Rank. Yalom was deeply influenced by Rollo May, who was Yalom's own therapist. And May had absorbed Rank's writings in the mid-30s and was totally dazzled. He wrote the foreword. Rollo May, who then became one of the great therapists of the second half of the 20th century, Rollo wrote the foreword to my book, Psychology of Difference, the American Lectures of Otto Rank, published by Princeton in 1996. And in that foreword, Rollo says, I was dazzled by Rank. And so people who met Rank would leave the room like their face had changed, their body posture was more energized, their love of life has been reignited. And I found out, I just have a short quote from Martha Graham.
Oh, yeah, she was the dance at
Martha Graham created modern dance in the early 20th century. She wanted to go beyond the formalities of classical ballet to create something new. She was totally transformed simply by reading that book, Art and Artist. And she always talked about Rank's influence. She never met Rank. She read at least that book, according to Martha Graham's biographer, was a very influential in her life. So what Rank did was he spoke to artists and people who were blocked in their creative life force. And he was able somehow, magic, I can't tell you how he did it.
Yeah. Did Anais Nin describe exactly what he did, though? Or did she go into it in her diaries like that?
Anais Nin is very poetic in her account, although she does write about 150 pages. So I'll give you just a little poetic summary. She did in her diary of what her experience was with Rank. I don't have a lot on it, but this is what he said. This is what Anais Nin said. I'm quoting in my book. So I have this is really stunning. This is her first encounter with Rank in November 1933. And she left the consulting room in Paris, went downstairs and sat on a park bench and started to write as quickly as she could. She wanted to capture everything that had happened. She was so startled and amazed and transfixed. Here's what she writes by Rank. His joyousness and activity immediately relieve one's pain. The neurotic knot which ties up one's faculties in a vicious circle of conflict, paralysis, more conflict, guilt, atonement, punishment, and more guilt. This is Anais Nin talking about what happened during the first visit. Immediately, I felt air and space and movement, vitality, joy of detecting, divining. Rank has got some mojo there. The spaciousness of his mind, the fine dexterity and muscular power, the swift changing colors of his own moods. This was not a man who was serving as a blank screen. He showed himself. He was authentic. The swiftness of his rhythm, because intuitive and subtle. I trust him. We are far from the banalities and cliches of orthodox psychoanalysis. I sense an intelligence rendered clairvoyant by feeling. I sense an artist. So imagine, what would it be like to go to an artist, a world-class artist, I don't know, Leonardo, let's say, or
it's beautiful.
Dostoevsky, or somebody like that, and they just they're there to help you as a therapist. It would be like a transforming experience to be in the presence of such a human being. I'm sure Jung had similar effect on people.
I think, some people these days talk a little bit about the shaman, and between two worlds is that, perhaps the healer, like in Australian Aboriginality, there's the song man and the dance and the songs, but one would think that maybe the shaman can bring something a little bit other towards the
interaction. So the shaman somehow is connected to the whole cosmos. That's what they're doing when they practice their rituals and do their dances and drumming. They're connecting to all existence. And Rank uses a wonderful word in German. He used the word das Ganze, and it was translated in his book Will Therapy as the all.
Yeah.
The all. I mean, it takes my breath away and this is why Matthew Fox, a dear friend, came upon Otto Rank and was totally transfixed. So Matthew has been writing about Rank for 50 years, as long as I have. And every time I write a book, I send it to him, and he just is so inspired.
This connection to the cosmos. And it seems to me that this is something Jung had, and Jung might have had different words to this. He called it the mysterium tremendum, the awe, the awe, the mystery, and the wonder when you face the divine or whatever.
Yeah.
The cosmos sometimes. But Rank and Jung but Freud wouldn't have a bar of any of that. That was just not his cup of tea.
Freud was a positivist. Freud was acclaimed, self-proclaimed scientist. He was there to do research, and he did not feel comfortable. He knew about mysticism and the cosmos and the all. These are not subjects that were foreign to him, but he was not interested in them and didn't see relevance for allowing his patients access to those kinds of experiences.
And also saw it as an escape from reality.
Yeah.
Whereas some might say it's in Indian yoga, they might say that is reality.
That is. I agree completely. What else are we doing here other than trying to connect to the all, to the cosmos? We are little microscopic fragments, specks of dust on a tiny, insignificant planet in the vast, incredibly spacious, immeasurable cosmos. And so we are on a planet that is circling around a slightly larger speck of dust, and that's our existence. And so,
somehow it's linked to creativity as well, because
of course, yes.
And this is maybe what I enjoy so much about Matthew Fox's writing is the creative cosmos. There's two words that go together.
Yes. Creation, spirituality. He's deep advocate, a strong, powerful voice for rediscovering the mystics of Christian tradition that the church, the Catholic Church in particular, has done everything possible to condemn, to reject, to forget. And so this is why Cardinal Ratzinger decided that Matthew Fox would no longer be allowed to be a priest in the Catholic Church.
So he went through a little bit similar to Rank.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why one of the reasons he identifies with Rank is that the Pope of Vienna decided to excommunicate the Reverend Otto Rank, which is he can identify with that. Matthew's work is so important. I really encourage all your watchers to just
It
Pick up
is.
any book by Matthew Fox, and you will be
It's
swept away.
somehow, you know, so fundamental, it seems to me, that even
Yeah.
between original sin and original blessing, and original
Yes.
blessing has to do with that creative cosmos, and oh,
Right.
it's
Right.
very
Yeah.
important,
That's right. Exactly what it is. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
important. And I might just say, Robert, that when I was, reading Matthew and having a chat as well, I was thinking, you know, original sin in religion, it's been transferred to neurosis or illness in
Yes.
psychology in
Yeah.
a way.
That's
And
right. Yes.
so, as Thomas More would say, or other people, people go to therapists to be fixed or whatever. Whereas that shift towards our creative capacity and the creative cosmos seems to me is where we're needing to go, or what's being suggested.
Absolutely.
And one
Yeah.
thing that Rank said, which I think is worthy of incredible amount of thought, neurosis is a failure of creativity. And
That's an astonishing statement.
it is an astonishing state.
And it's so powerful because it liberates people. So I go to my therapist, I'm feeling depressed, I'm anxious, I'm lonely, I'm not productive at work, I have problems with my wife and kids, I don't see a future. And your therapist gives you drugs instead of releasing the creative life force itself, which is in all of us. All human beings can tap it.
Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
will transform everything. So, neurosis is a failure, a repression of creativity. It's a creative act. This is also absolutely brilliant. I think Jung may have said something similar. So, for Rank, neurosis is a creation, like everything is a creation. He does not see any part of the human experience as being uncreative. It's all there. It all constantly surges up in the every flower that erupts, every child that emerges out of the womb, every new idea, every artwork, every new podcast that John Wilson does is an expression of the creative energy that is all of us have and can express.
And this is an old term in psychological jargon ease, but co-creating or co-creators is, and Gene Houston used to use that term. I know Matthews used that term a lot, but I find that such a beautiful approach towards life, if you want to put it that way, that we are co-creators.
Co-creators. That's right. We have been given the godlike gift of creating and constantly recreating and new creating. Always something can be created, and we are part of the life force. So this is a really a very subtle idea, and it took many years for me to try to make sense of it, and I finally did it in the chapter called I think it's called Carl Rogers Meets Otto Rank, which I tell the story of what happened when Carl Rogers actually did meet Otto Rank in 1936. So I talk about that. I won't go into details. I invite your viewers to explore that chapter.
It's necessary to say that Carl Rogers, who's been a huge person in psychology and
incredible,
especially in the United States, but all over, he credits or what is it's Otto Rank that influenced Carl Rogers very much.
He says as a result of a single weekend encounter, which was a kind of a workshop, a training workshop, you might say, some lectures, probably demonstrations of how Rank conducted therapy. 1936, Carl Rogers was a unknown guidance counselor in Rochester, New York. He had a PhD from Teachers College, but he had never.
But he was more a researcher, wasn't he? He was more of
Well, he was interested in therapy. No, he
Yeah.
wasn't a researcher, but he
Oh,
wasn't. He was trained in Freudian analysis at Teachers
right.
College, Columbia University, and he wasn't happy with it. It didn't seem to work. So he heard about Rank because he had a social worker on his staff who had
Mm.
been a student of Rank's at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work. So she said, "Hey, why don't you invite Otto Rank for a weekend?" And Carl Rogers did, and I tell the story in 3 chapters in the book.
Mm.
I have to reconstruct it because there's no historical records of it. So
Right.
I did my best to try to figure out what he would have said based on his writings and the lectures he gave at other places. At
Mm.
the end of that weekend, that's 3 days,
Mm.
Rogers says, I became infected with Rankian ideas,
Yeah.
like a virus of some kind. Otto
Yeah.
Rank was so influential that after 3 days, Carl Rogers abandoned his Freudian training
Mm.
and started to create his own very important, very original model of therapy, which became called client-centered therapy, eventually person-centered therapy, as it is now. And
Mm.
hundreds of thousands of therapists and social workers around the world, including Australia and every other part of the world, are practicing that. And Rogers says, I thank Otto Rank. So Rogers never denied that Otto Rank was his most important influence, but there was no record of it.
Yeah.
So I had to try to reconstruct what he
But
probably.
in short speak again, it's kind of like sometimes when people speak about the feminine, they talk about relatedness. The two seem to go hand in hand. It's a virtue of the feminine is the relatedness. But I think with Carl Rogers, that's what I get is he's the one that started to articulate. Obviously got his initial ideas prior to that. From someone like Rank, but he started to articulate the need for relatedness in the therapeutic context. So
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was quite a feminine input, in one sense. It was kind of a different way of approach. I mean, I know that sounds a bit ridiculous considering it was Carl Rogers a male, but he was at the beginnings of that anyway, put it that way.
Absolutely, yeah. So Rank not only influenced American social work through his teachings at University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work, which was a very important school, but he influenced Carl Rogers and Rollo May, who was the founder in America of existential therapy.
Mm.
So Otto Rank now, by most accounts, is seen as the founder of existential-humanistic therapy in America and really in the world. I mean, the truth is that there was no other therapist doing what he was doing in the 1920s, we're talking. There was a psychiatrist by the name of Ludwig Binswanger who was
Is he an Australian? Was he an Australian?
No, he was German. I'm sorry to say, I'm sure there were great Australian pioneers in therapy, but I am not knowledgeable enough about Down Under to be able to
I'll send you a
identify
list later
who they were.
Yeah.
But I would like to go.
It's encyclopedic, the list of influential therapists. So we'll send that across.
Please send it to me. Yeah, I would like to see that. So Binswanger is now seen as the first existential psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So Binswanger was an MD.
Yeah.
Rank was a PhD. He's not a psychiatrist. So I think it's fair to say Binswanger was the first existential psychiatrist. He was doing work not that different from Rank's in the late 20s and 30s. They knew each other.
Yeah.
Binswanger was a friend of Freud's. And Rank had met Binswanger, and Binswanger read Rank, and vice versa. So they never cite each other. People who work on things that are similar often don't bother citing other people. They're just too busy with developing their own ideas.
Yeah. Robert, I'm aware we've gone a long way over, right? But I'm thinking that as a way of finishing, we've been talking about the genius of Otto Rank. Is there another something that you would add to this cooking pot of his genius? Because we've spoken about a few things, but is there something else that we might have missed about Rank, do you think?
Well, let me point out something that I spend a lot of time on in the book that I haven't, I've skirted around. So a number of times you've mentioned, say, isn't this relationship therapy a kind of feminine model of human nature? And well, Otto Rank was devoted to enhancing the creativity and life force of women. So I mentioned it briefly, but virtually all the faculty, well, not the faculty, but the students, social work students at Penn were female. And so I explain why in the book that, but I believe that Rank began his writings on the creative will. The first time he used the term was 1927. He did not use it before that. I tracked it down as far as I can tell. I could have missed something, but I did my best. And what was he doing in 1927? He was teaching mostly women students at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work how to exercise leadership abilities in promoting social justice and racial justice. And his students were women. So because that was his audience, in my reading of him now, I see him as having focused on the issue of creative will as an outcome of trying to help his mostly female students at the Penn School become better leaders. That is a new idea that I had not written about before, and other people who've written about Rank have not touched on. So I'm kind of really interested in how people react to that.
When I was reading your book, I was, because in a previous birth, long before podcasts existed, I was in the corporate environment, in Sydney, and management development and all that. And one thing I noticed is that, you started to talk quite a bit in your book about leadership development and how that came from Pennsylvania. And people like Edgar Schein and stuff. And I was starting to see a crossover between psychology and leadership development as a field, which had its luminaries. And
I'm the first person to argue and bring evidence to promote the idea that Otto Rank was one of the pioneer theorists of leadership development. The term didn't even exist in the 1920s.
No.
My research shows that Kurt Lewin was the first one in the late 30s or even mid 40s. The term leadership development, it didn't exist as an idea. And he was doing that in the mid to late 1920s. So when I told this to Ed Schein, who became a good friend, he wrote me back saying, I sent him some articles, and then he sends me an email message, which I quote in my book. And let me end with that, because I have deep admiration and respect and fondness for Ed. He died, I think it was 3 years ago, at 92, I think he was.
Yeah.
So I knew him for about the last 10 years of his life. And he wrote me after I introduced him to Rank, who he didn't know at all. He sends me an email saying, I just can't resist ending on this. If I can find it.
Yeah.
Oh, here it is. So here's on page 17 of my book, MIT Sloan School professor Edgar Schein, founder of the study of organizational culture and a Grand Master of Leadership Development, says, this is what he wrote to me in an email, quote, if we now are arguing for experientially based self-development and are accepting of the importance of will, in addition to brain, and heart, perhaps it turns out that we are all Rankians. That's just flipped me out.
Yeah.
But I footnoted, I amended what he said because I didn't think Rank would approve. So he didn't like the term Rankian. He was not happy with that. He didn't want people to follow him. So I wrote, but Rank did not want the social workers he taught at the University of Pennsylvania to become Rankians. As an existential psychologist, he urged them to become themselves, fully alive and energized as leaders, and simultaneously to feel awe and humility at the breathtaking fact that they were alive, recalling always that human beings are merely specks of dust in the vast, incomprehensible cosmos.
That's great. That's a beautiful place to finish, Robert. And I want to thank you very much. And it's been really a pleasure. Again, I said it before, but the way you melded scholarship with interesting in your book and absorbing is how I wanted to be as a scholar, but I found it very difficult to live up to those standards. It's been a wonderful read, and I've loved delving into Otto Rank with you. And just one thing, if he didn't like them being called Rankians, maybe we could call them Kramerians or something.
No, I don't want anybody to be a clone of me. I want you to be John Wilson. If you're John Wilson, the world will be a better place.
That's great. Thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, John.